I spent nights taking care of a billionaire former Fleet Admiral. When the will was read, his fortune was given to a long-lost nephew. I was already walking out the door when the lawyer stared at me and whispered, "Sir, who is your biological father? I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Clifford, 66 years old, retired Navy SEAL, and I've been alone for the past 8 years. The apartment is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that barely fits a table, and a living room where the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator. My kids don't call. They haven't in years. The last time I spoke to my son, Marcus, he said I was a robot, that I cared more about discipline than about him. My daughter, Rachel, just stopped answering. My youngest, Brian, blocked my number after I missed his college graduation because of a training I was leading. They're right, I guess. I was never there for birthday parties, never helped with homework. When they cried, I told them to toughen up. When they needed a hug, I gave them a lecture about responsibility. The Navy taught me to be strong, to lead, to never show weakness. I thought I was teaching them the same, but all I did was push them away. I woke up that Thursday morning like any other, made my bed with hospital corners, drank black coffee, did 50 push-ups even though my shoulder aches now. Then I headed to the grocery store. I go every Thursday at 9 in the morning. Same time, same route, old habits. I was in the cereal aisle reaching for the same brand I've bought for 30 years when I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was him. Admiral Richard Ashford, Fleet Admiral, a living legend. I'd seen his picture in the Naval Academy halls, read about his missions in classified briefings. The man had led operations that changed the course of history. But the man standing in front of me didn't look like a legend. He looked lost. He was holding a can of soup, staring at it like he couldn't remember why he'd picked it up. His hands were shaking. His clothes were clean but wrinkled, like he'd slept in them, and he was alone. I approached carefully. "Sir?" I said. He turned slowly, his eyes unfocused. "Are you Admiral Ashford?" He blinked, looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am, or I was." I introduced myself, told him I'd served, told him I knew who he was. He nodded, but I could tell he was struggling to follow. I asked if he needed help. He looked down at the soup can in his hands, then back at me. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he said, his voice cracked. "I don't remember how I got here." My chest tightened. I'd seen this before. Men who'd given everything, only to be forgotten. I asked if he had family nearby, someone I could call. He let out a bitter laugh. "Family," he repeated. "They put me in a home, took my car keys, took my freedom. Today I just walked out. No one stopped me. I stood there frozen. This man, this hero, was abandoned, just like me. And in that moment, I saw myself in 20 years, alone, forgotten, wandering grocery store aisles with no one to call. I didn't think. I just acted. "Sir," I said, "let me help you." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude. Real, unguarded gratitude. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "You don't know me." "I do know you," I said. "I know what it's like to be left behind." We stood there in the middle of the grocery store, 2 old soldiers who'd lost everything except the instinct to keep moving forward. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel completely alone. I drove him to my apartment. He didn't ask where we were going. He just sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. When we got inside, he looked around the bare walls, the single chair, the folding table. "You live here alone?" he asked. I nodded. He sat down heavily, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "Me too," he said. "Well, I did, before they took me." I made coffee. We sat across from each other, 2 men who'd spent decades leading others but couldn't lead ourselves out of loneliness. I asked about his family. He told me his daughter, Patricia, had put him in a nursing home 3 years ago. Said it was for his own good, but really it was because she wanted control. Control of his money, control of his decisions, control of everything. "She has power of attorney," he said, his voice flat. "Sold my medals, my uniforms, everything I'd earned. And when I confronted her, she said I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate her sacrifice." I clenched my jaw. I knew that feeling. The feeling of being blamed for someone else's cruelty. "What about you?" he asked. "Why are you alone?" I told him. Told him about my kids, about how I'd prioritized the mission over them, about how I'd been so focused on making them strong that I forgot to make them feel loved. The Admiral listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You sound like me. 30 years ago. That night I set up the couch for him, gave him a blanket and a pillow. He thanked me, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked like hope, or maybe just relief. Before he lay down, he turned to me. "Clifford," he said, "I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, turned off the light, and went to my room. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the Admiral, thinking about my kids, thinking about how we'd both ended up here, alone, forgotten. Two men who'd given everything to duty, only to realize too late that duty doesn't keep you warm at night. I didn't know it then, but that night changed everything. The next morning I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen and found the Admiral standing by the stove trying to figure out how to use my old coffee maker. He looked up when he heard me. "Morning," he said. "Thought I'd make myself useful." I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd felt in months. We sat together, drinking bad coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of silence pressing down on me. The Admiral told me more about his life, about his years in the Navy, about the missions he couldn't talk about the men he'd lost, and about his daughter, Patricia, who he said had always been distant. Even as a child, she never understood him, never cared about his service, only about what he could give her. And when I got older, he said, when I started forgetting things, she saw her chance, put me away, took everything. I felt anger rising in my chest, not just for him, for both of us. We'd given everything to protect people who didn't even care enough to remember us. But sitting there, across from this man I barely knew, I felt something else too. Connection, purpose, maybe even family. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how long the Admiral would stay. But for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't alone. And neither was he. The Admiral stayed. Days turned into weeks. I set up a routine for both of us. Every morning I'd wake him up at 0700. We'd have coffee together. I'd make breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy. Then I'd help him with his medications. He had 7 different pills and he could never remember which ones to take when. At first I thought it was just old age, but the more time I spent with him, the more I realized it was more than that. He'd forget where he was. He'd call me by names I didn't recognize. Some days, he'd look at me like I was a stranger. Other days, he'd tell me stories from his past with perfect clarity. I took him to the VA hospital for a checkup. The doctor, a young woman who looked too tired for her age, ran some tests. When she came back, her expression was serious. She asked to speak to me privately. The Admiral waited in the exam room, staring at a poster about heart disease. Dr. Martinez looked at her clipboard, then at me. "Mr. Ashford has early-stage dementia," she said. "It's progressing. He needs consistent care, monitoring, and he definitely shouldn't be living alone." I nodded slowly. "What about his family?" She frowned. "According to our records, his daughter has medical power of attorney, but she hasn't brought him in for a checkup in over 2 years." She paused. "Are you a relative?" "No," I said. "Just a friend." She studied me for a moment. "Well, he's lucky to have you. Most people in his situation end up in facilities where no one really cares." She handed me a list of medications and instructions. "Make sure he takes these. And if he gets worse, bring him back immediately." I drove him home in silence. The Admiral stared out the window, watching the world pass by. When we got back to the apartment, he turned to me. "I heard what she said," he said quietly. "I'm losing my mind, aren't I?" I didn't know what to say, so I just told him the truth. "You're not alone. I'll help you." He smiled, but it was sad. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I should have known better." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. The weeks went by. I cooked for him, made sure he took his meds, helped him shower when he couldn't remember how. It felt strange at first. I'd spent my whole life being the hard one, the one who didn't do feelings or soft things. But taking care of the Admiral, it was different. It felt right. One afternoon, we were sitting in the living room. The Admiral was looking through an old photo album I'd found in his bag. Pictures of him in uniform, shaking hands with presidents, standing on the deck of aircraft carriers. He traced his finger over one photo, a young version of himself with a woman I didn't recognize. "That's Helen," he said softly. "She was the only woman I ever truly loved." I leaned forward. "What happened to her?" He closed the album slowly. "I was stationed overseas. We had a brief relationship, then I was deployed. When I came back, she was gone. I never saw her again." His voice cracked. "I looked for her, years later, but I never found her. I married someone else, had Patricia. But it was never the same." He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "I think about her all the time. What could have been, what I lost." I sat back, feeling the weight of his regret. It was the same weight I carried, the weight of lost chances, of people I'd pushed away because I was too proud, too focused, too damn stubborn. We sat in silence for a while. Then the Admiral spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "Clifford, do you ever think about your kids?" "Every day," I said. "Every single day." He nodded. "We're the same, you and I. We thought duty was enough. We thought being strong meant being alone." He looked at me with an intensity that cut through the fog of his dementia. But we were wrong. I felt something crack inside me, a wall I'd built over decades. And for the first time since my kids stopped calling, I felt tears sting my eyes. I didn't let them fall. Old habits. But the Admiral saw. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. It's okay to feel, son. It doesn't make you weak. Son. He called me son. And in that moment, I realized something. This man, this stranger I'd found in a grocery store, understood me better than my own family ever had. The next day, the Admiral's health took a turn. He collapsed in the bathroom. I called 911, rode with him in the ambulance. At the hospital, they stabilized him. The doctor said his heart was weak, that he needed surgery, a bypass. Without it, he had maybe 6 months. I called the number on file for Patricia. She answered on the 5th ring. What? She snapped. I told her about her father, about the surgery, about how serious it was. There was a long pause. Then she sighed, annoyed. I'll be there tomorrow. She showed up 2 days later. Walked into the hospital room like she was doing us a favor. She didn't hug her father. Didn't ask how he was feeling. She just looked at me. Who are you? I'm the one who's been taking care of him, I said evenly. She narrowed her eyes. Why? Because someone had to. Patricia turned to her father. Daddy, you can't just run off like that. You need professional care. The Admiral looked at her with tired eyes. You mean you need my money? Her face tightened. That's not fair. Fair? The Admiral's voice was stronger than I'd heard in weeks. You sold my medals, Patricia. You put me in that place and forgot about me. Don't talk to me about fair. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Looked at me with pure hatred. Then she walked out without another word. The Admiral reached for my hand. Stay with me, Clifford. Please. I'm not going anywhere, I promised. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. The night before, the Admiral asked me to call his lawyer. I did. A man named Douglas Whitmore arrived an hour later, briefcase in hand. The Admiral asked me to step out while they talked. I waited in the hallway, feeling uneasy. When the lawyer came out, he nodded at me but didn't say anything. The Admiral called me back in. He looked exhausted but determined. Clifford, I need you to know something, he said. You've been more of a son to me in these few months than anyone has been in my entire life. I felt my throat tighten. Sir, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He gripped my hand weakly. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know. You matter. You're not alone, and neither am I. The surgery went well, or so they said. The Admiral woke up briefly, squeezed my hand, then slipped into a coma. The doctor said it was his body shutting down, that it was just a matter of time. I stayed by his bedside every day. Patricia came once, stayed for 10 minutes, left without saying goodbye to him. A week later, Admiral Richard Ashford died. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and for the first time since I was a child, I cried. I didn't just lose a friend. I lost the only person who'd made me feel like I mattered, but I didn't know yet. The Admiral had one more surprise for me. The funeral was on a Tuesday. I arranged everything myself. The Navy sent an honor guard. They folded the flag with precision, handed it to Patricia. She took it without emotion, like it was just another object to store away. I stood in the back of the chapel. I wasn't family. I had no right to sit up front. But I needed to be there, needed to say goodbye to the only person who'd understood me in years. Patricia gave a speech, talked about her father's service, his sacrifice, his dedication to country. She didn't mention that she'd abandoned him, didn't mention the nursing home, didn't mention that he'd died with only a stranger by his side. When she finished, people clapped politely. I felt sick. After the service, people I'd never seen before came up to Patricia. Distant cousins, old Navy buddies, people who wanted to pay respects, or maybe just be seen. I watched from the corner as Patricia played the grieving daughter perfectly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, accepting condolences with a practiced sadness. No one talked to me. I was invisible, just the way I'd been my whole life. I was about to leave when Patricia's lawyer, Douglas Whitmore, approached me. Mr. Reynolds, he said, I need you to stay for the reading of the will. I frowned. Why? I'm not family. He adjusted his glasses. The Admiral requested your presence. Please. It's important. I followed him to a private room in the funeral home. Patricia was already there, sitting in a leather chair, legs crossed. She looked at me with cold eyes when I entered. What's he doing here? She asked Whitmore. The lawyer didn't answer. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Let's begin, he said. Patricia leaned forward, eager. I stayed by the door, ready to leave the moment this was over. Whitmore cleared his throat and began reading. I, Admiral Richard James Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. He went through the formalities. Then he got to the important part. To my daughter, Patricia Ann Ashford, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my personal effects, excluding military honors and memorabilia. Patricia's face went pale. 50,000? That's it? Whitmore continued without acknowledging her. The remainder of my estate, including all financial assets, property, and investments, valued at approximately $40 million, I leave to James Richard Ashford, nephew, previously believed lost. The room went silent. I blinked. $40 million to a nephew no one had ever mentioned. Patricia stood up, her voice shaking with rage. What nephew? Dad didn't have a brother. This is fraud. Whitmore remained calm. I assure you, Mrs. Ashford, this is legitimate. James Richard Ashford is the sole beneficiary of your father's estate. Patricia slammed her hands on the table. I'm contesting this. This is insane. She pointed at me. He probably manipulated my father. Convinced him to change the will while he was sick. I felt my jaw tighten. I didn't even know about this. Whitmore closed the folder. If you wish to contest, that's your right, but I should inform you that your father anticipated this reaction. He left detailed documentation, medical evaluations proving his mental competence at the time of signing, and witness statements. Patricia's face twisted with fury. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door slammed behind her. I stood there, frozen. $40 million to a nephew I'd never heard of. I felt used. Felt like I'd been part of some game I didn't understand. I turned to leave. Mr. Reynolds. Whitmore's voice stopped me. I need to ask you something. It's important. I turned back, exhausted. What? He studied me carefully. Who is your biological father? I stared at him. What kind of question is that? Please, he said. It's relevant. I shook my head. I don't know. My mother never told me. He left before I was born. Why does it matter? Whitmore reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. The Admiral left this for you. He said you'd need to read it privately. I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. What is this? The truth, Whitmore said quietly. And then he added, Mr. Reynolds, I think you should sit down. I didn't sit. I tore open the envelope right there. Inside was a handwritten letter. The Admiral's handwriting. Shaky but clear. Clifford, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're probably confused. Angry, maybe even feeling betrayed. I don't blame you. I kept reading. There's something I never told you. Something I only discovered 2 years ago when I hired a private investigator to find someone from my past. A woman named Helen, your mother. My breath caught. I kept reading, my vision blurring. In 1958, I was stationed at a base in North Carolina. I met a woman. We had a brief relationship. I was young, reckless, and engaged to someone else. When my deployment orders came, I left. I never knew she was pregnant. I never knew about you. I had to stop, had to breathe. This couldn't be real. The letter continued. Decades later, when I finally found Helen, she was gone, but I found records, birth certificates, your name, Clifford James Reynolds, born April 12th, 1959. My son, my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. I watched you from a distance for months, learned about your life, your service, your family, and when you found me in that grocery store, I knew it was you. But I was a coward. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had by being absent. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. James Richard Ashford is you, Clifford. I gave you the inheritance under that name because legally, that's who you are, my son. The son I never got to raise, the son I never got to know. But in these last months, I finally got to be your father, and you were the son I always wished I'd had. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't stop them. Forgive me for not telling you sooner. Forgive me for all the years I wasn't there. But know this, you are not alone. You never were. You are my son, and I am so proud of you. The letter ended with his signature, Richard Ashford, and below it, one more line. Dad. I collapsed into the chair. Whitmore handed me a tissue. I didn't take it. I just sat there holding the letter, my entire world shattered and rebuilt in the span of 5 minutes. The Admiral was my father, the man I'd cared for, the man who'd understood me. He was my father, and I'd never known. Whitmore spoke gently. There are DNA results in the envelope as well. Dated 6 months ago. He had them done before he started showing symptoms. Everything is documented, legal. I looked up at him. My voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't he tell me? Whitmore sat down across from me. He said he was afraid you'd reject him, afraid you'd think he was just another person who abandoned you. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. He was right. I would have. But he also said something else. Whitmore continued. He said that in the time you spent together, he got to know the man you became. And that was worth more than any apology he could have given. I stared at the letter in my hands, all those conversations, all those moments. He'd known the whole time, and I'd called him sir. I'd kept my distance. I'd treated him like a mission, not like family, because I didn't know how to be anything else. Whitmore stood. Take your time, Mr. Reynolds. Or should I say Mr. Ashford? There's no rush. When you're ready, we'll handle the estate transfer. He left me alone in that room. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, holding the letter, reading it over and over, trying to understand how the universe had brought me to that grocery store, how I'd found my father without even knowing it, and how, once again, I'd lost him. But this time it was different. This time he'd left me something, not just money, something more important, the truth, and the knowledge that I mattered, that I was loved, even if I'd never known it while he was alive. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of that funeral home. Patricia was waiting in the parking lot. When she saw me, her eyes were full of venom. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "I'm going to fight this. I'm going to prove you manipulated him." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw what the Admiral must have seen. A woman who only cared about money, who'd never loved him, who'd thrown him away the moment he became inconvenient. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Fight it, but you'll lose. Because your father made his choice. And it wasn't you." I got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw her standing there, alone in the parking lot. And I realized something. I wasn't angry at her. I just felt sorry for her. She'd had a father her whole life, and she'd wasted it. I'd only had mine for a few months, but I'd loved him, and he'd loved me. And that was more than she'd ever have. I drove for hours. No destination, just driving. The letter sat on the passenger seat, and every time I glanced at it, a fresh wave of emotion hit me. Grief, anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was just exhaustion. I ended up at the ocean, parked near a beach I used to run on during my active duty days. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to dip toward the horizon. I got out of the car, letter in hand, and walked toward the water. The waves crashed against the shore, steady, rhythmic, the same way they'd been for millions of years, indifferent to human pain. I sat down in the sand and read the letter again. 5th time, maybe 6th. My father. Admiral Richard Ashford was my father, and I'd spent months with him, never knowing, never having the chance to call him Dad while he was alive, never having the chance to tell him I understood, that I forgave him, that I loved him. My phone rang. I didn't want to answer, but I looked at the screen anyway. Marcus, my son. I stared at his name for a long moment, then let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text came through. "Dad, I heard about the Admiral. I'm sorry." I read it 3 times. "Sorry." That's all he said. Not "I want to talk," not "let's meet." Just "sorry." I typed out a response, started to write something about how I wished things were different, how I missed him, how I wanted to try again. But I deleted it. Instead, I just wrote, "Thank you." I put the phone away and stared at the ocean. My whole life, I'd believed that being strong meant being alone, that needing people made you weak. The Navy reinforced that, made me believe that the mission was everything, that emotions were distractions, that love was a luxury I couldn't afford. But sitting there, holding my father's letter, I realized how wrong I'd been. Strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about letting people in, about being vulnerable enough to connect. And I'd spent 66 years refusing to do that. The Admiral understood. He'd made the same mistakes, and in the end, he'd tried to fix them. Not by demanding forgiveness, not by forcing reconciliation, but by showing me, through his actions, what it meant to care. He'd been my father for 3 months. And in that time, he'd taught me more about being a man than I'd learned in 6 decades. I stayed at the beach until dark. When I finally drove home, I felt different, not fixed, not healed, but different, like something inside me had shifted, like a door I'd kept locked for years had finally opened. The next morning, Whitmore called. "Patricia is filing a lawsuit," he said, "contesting the will, claiming undue influence and mental incapacity." I wasn't surprised. "What do we do?" "We fight," he said simply. "I have everything we need. Medical records proving the Admiral was mentally competent, testimony from doctors, the DNA results, and the letter. Everything is airtight." "How long will it take?" "Months, probably. Maybe a year. She's going to drag this out as long as she can." I exhaled. "Fine. Do what you need to do." Whitmore paused. "Clifford, there's something else. The Admiral left instructions, specific things he wanted you to do with the inheritance. He didn't want you to just have the money. He wanted you to use it. Use it how? There's another letter in his safety deposit box. He wanted you to read it before making any decisions about the estate. Where's the box? First National Bank. Downtown. I'll meet you there this afternoon." I hung up and sat in silence. More letters, more secrets. I didn't know if I could handle any more revelations, but I went anyway. The bank was cold and sterile. Whitmore was already waiting when I arrived. We were escorted to a private room. A bank employee brought in a metal box, set it on the table, and left us alone. Whitmore handed me a key. "This is yours now." I unlocked the box. Inside were papers, documents, and another envelope with my name on it. I opened it carefully. "Clifford," the letter began. If you're reading this, you know the truth. You know you're my son, and you're probably angry, confused, maybe even feeling betrayed. I understand. I kept reading, but I need you to understand something. I didn't give you this inheritance to ease my guilt. I gave it to you because you deserve it. Not because you're my son, but because of who you are. A man of honor. A man who cared for a stranger when no one else would. A man who deserves a second chance. My throat tightened. I watched you, Clifford. I saw how you lived. Alone. Punishing yourself for mistakes you think you made. But you weren't the villain in your story. You were just a man doing the best he could with what he knew. And sometimes, that's not enough. But it doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human. I had to stop reading. Had to breathe. The letter continued. I'm giving you this money because I want you to have the chance I never did. The chance to make things right. Not by forcing your kids to forgive you. Not by demanding they accept you. But by showing them, the way you showed me, what it means to care without expecting anything in return. I wiped my eyes. Use this money wisely, Clifford. Help people who need it. Veterans who've been forgotten. Families who've been torn apart. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to let your kids see who you really are. Not the soldier. Not the machine. Just the man. The letter ended with his signature, and below it, another line. I'm proud to have been your father, even if it was only for a little while. I sat there holding the letter, feeling the weight of his words. Whitmore didn't say anything. Just let me process. Finally, I looked up. What did he want me to do? Whitmore opened a folder. He left detailed instructions. He wanted you to establish a foundation for veterans dealing with family estrangement. He wanted programs for counseling, mediation, support groups. He even outlined the structure, staff, funding, everything. I stared at the documents. He thought of everything, planned it all out, left me a roadmap for how to make something good out of the pain we'd both carried. He also left this, Whitmore said, handing me a small wooden box. Inside was a military medal, the Navy Cross, the Admiral's Navy Cross, and beneath it, a note. For my son. So you never forget that you are a hero too. I closed the box carefully. My hands were shaking. Whitmore spoke gently. He believed in you, Clifford, more than you know. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded. The lawsuit took 11 months. Patricia fought hard. Hired expensive lawyers, tried to prove the Admiral wasn't mentally competent, tried to prove I'd manipulated him, tried to prove the DNA results were fake. But Whitmore was right. Everything was airtight. The medical records were clear, the DNA was irrefutable, and the letter the Admiral had written was read in court, every word. When the judge made the final ruling, Patricia was ordered to cease all legal action. The estate was mine, $40 million, and the weight of my father's hopes. Patricia didn't look at me when she left the courtroom, just walked out with her lawyers. Her face tight with fury. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Whitmore shook my hand. Congratulations, he said. What will you do now? I looked down at the folder in my hands. The foundation plans, the Admiral's legacy. I'm going to do what he asked, I said. I'm going to help people. Whitmore smiled. He'd be proud. I left the courthouse and drove to the cemetery, stood in front of the Admiral's grave. The headstone was simple, just his name, rank, and dates. I placed the Navy Cross on the grave, knelt down in the grass. I found you, Dad, I said quietly. I found you, and I lost you, and I found you again. And I'm going to make sure your life meant something. I'm going to make sure other people don't have to feel the way we did. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. I stayed there for a long time. Just me and the man I'd never gotten to call father while he was alive. But I called him that now. And somehow I think he heard me. When I finally stood up, I felt lighter, not happy, not fixed, but lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight for 66 years and had finally been given permission to set it down. I walked back to my car, checked my phone. There was a message from Rachel, my daughter. Dad, it said, can we talk? I stared at the message. 3 words, 3 simple words that felt like a lifeline. I didn't know if she'd forgive me. Didn't know if we'd ever have a real relationship again. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I typed back, yes, anytime. Then I drove away from the cemetery, the sun setting behind me, and I realized something. The Admiral had given me more than money. He'd given me hope. Hope that it wasn't too late. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still fix what I'd broken. And that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. I met Rachel at a coffee shop near her apartment. Neutral ground. She'd chosen it, and I understood why. She needed control. Needed to be able to leave if things went wrong. I got there early, ordered black coffee, sat by the window, waited. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd faced enemy combatants in hostile territories without flinching. But the thought of facing my daughter terrified me. She walked in at exactly 3 o'clock, always punctual. She got that from me, I guess. She spotted me immediately, hesitated for just a second, then walked over. She looked older than I remembered. 34 now, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But she was still my little girl, still had her mother's eyes. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was careful, guarded. "Hi, Rachel," I said. "Thank you for coming." She sat down across from me, ordered a latte from the waitress. We sat in silence until the drink arrived. She wrapped her hands around the cup, staring at it like it held answers. "I heard about the Admiral," she finally said. "Marcus told me." I nodded. I didn't know what to say. She took a sip of her latte. "He was your father, your biological father." "Yes," I said quietly. "I just found out." Rachel looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. That must have been hard, finding him and losing him like that. It was, I admitted, but I'm grateful I got to know him, even if it was only for a little while. She set her cup down. "Why didn't you ever talk about your parents, about your past?" "We grew up knowing nothing about where you came from." I stared at my coffee. "Because I didn't want you to know. Didn't want you to see me as someone who'd been abandoned. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd think I was weak." Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "Weak? Dad, we thought you were made of stone. Made. We thought you didn't care about anything except the Navy, except the mission." I flinched. I know I failed you." She shook her head. "You didn't fail me because you were weak. You failed me because you wouldn't let us in, because you acted like emotions were the enemy." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the pain I'd caused. The years of feeling unloved, unwanted. I'd done to her exactly what I'd feared someone would do to me. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I thought I was protecting you, teaching you to be strong, but all I did was push you away." She wiped her eyes. "You did. You pushed all of us away. And when we needed you most, you weren't there." I swallowed hard. "I know. I can't take that back. Can't fix what I broke, but I want you to know something. Taking care of the Admiral, it changed me. He showed me what I'd been doing wrong my whole life, and I don't want to die without you knowing that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry." Rachel was quiet for a long time. She stared out the window, watching people walk by. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I want to believe you, Dad. I really do. But I've been hurt too many times. We all have." "I understand," I said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to forget. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here." She nodded slowly. "Okay." We sat there for another hour, talked about small things. Her job as a teacher, her partner, someone she'd been with for 2 years, someone I'd never met. She showed me pictures on her phone, pictures of a life I knew nothing about. When we said goodbye, she hugged me. It was brief, awkward, but it was something. I held on maybe a second too long, and when she pulled away, I saw tears in her eyes. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she said. "You too, sweetheart." I watched her walk away, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, fragile hope. I used part of the inheritance to pay off Rachel's student loans. She didn't know it was me. I had Whitmore set it up anonymously. She called me a week later, confused and grateful. I just told her I was happy for her. Didn't tell her the truth. Didn't need her to know. I just wanted her to have one less burden. Marcus was harder. He didn't respond to my messages, didn't answer when I called. I sent him a letter, handwritten. Told him about the Admiral. Told him about the foundation I was starting. Told him I understood if he never wanted to see me again, but that I loved him. That I'd always loved him, even when I didn't know how to show it. He didn't respond. Not for months, but I didn't give up. I kept sending letters, not too often, just once a month, updates about my life, about the foundation, about what I was learning. I didn't ask for anything, didn't demand reconciliation, just let him know I was there. Brian, my youngest, was somewhere in between. He agreed to meet me for lunch. We sat across from each other in a diner, the same diner I used to take him to when he was a kid. He ordered a burger. I ordered coffee. "Why now, Dad?" he asked. "Why are you suddenly trying?" I set my cup down. "Because I finally understand what I lost, and I don't want to die without at least trying to fix it." He stared at me. "You really think you can fix this? After everything?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe not, but I have to try." He ate his burger in silence. When he finished, he looked at me. "I'm not ready to forgive you," he said, "but I'm willing to listen. That's all I'm asking." He nodded. "Okay, we can try this. But if you screw up again, I'm done. No more chances. I understand. We started meeting once a month, just lunch. Sometimes we talked about the past, sometimes we didn't talk at all. But it was something, a foundation, fragile, but real. I poured myself into the Admiral's foundation, hired a team, set up counseling programs for veterans and their families, created support groups, built a network of mediators who specialized in family reconciliation. The foundation wasn't just about money, it was about giving people the tools to rebuild what they'd lost. I called it the Ashford Foundation, my father's name, his legacy. The first year was hard. We helped 23 families. Some reconciled, some didn't. But every single person who walked through our doors left knowing they weren't alone, that someone understood. I started attending the support groups myself, not as a leader, just as a participant. Sat in circles with other veterans who'd lost their families, who'd chosen duty over love, who carried the same regrets I did. And I shared my story, told them about the Admiral, about finding my father and losing him, about my kids, about the mistakes I'd made, and I listened to theirs. One night, a man named James stood up. He was in his 50s, Marine, divorced, 3 kids who wouldn't speak to him. He looked at me and said, "I spent my whole life thinking I was doing the right thing, but I was just running away. Running from the things that scared me. Love, vulnerability, needing people." I nodded. I knew exactly what he meant. "We're all running," I said. "But maybe it's time to stop." The room was quiet. Then someone else spoke, and another, and another. And we sat there, a room full of broken men, finally admitting that we needed help, that we needed each other. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel alone. 6 months after I met with Rachel, she invited me to her place for dinner. I almost said no, almost made an excuse, but I forced myself to go. Showed up with flowers, the way my mother used to teach me. Rachel opened the door, smiled, and let me in. Her partner, Alex, was in the kitchen cooking. They shook my hand, kind but cautious. We sat down to eat. Pasta, homemade bread, wine. It was simple, but it felt like everything. We talked about small things, work, weather, safe topics. But then Rachel said something that changed the night. "Dad," she said, "I'm glad you came." I looked at her surprised. "You are?" She nodded. "I'm still angry, still hurt, but I can see you're trying, and that matters." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you," I said quietly. Alex reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. "She told me about your foundation," they said. "What you're doing for other families. That's really good work." I looked down at my plate. "I'm just trying to make sure no one else has to feel the way we did." Rachel's eyes were wet. "That's all I ever wanted, Dad. For you to see us, to see me." "I do now," I said, "and I'm sorry it took so long." We didn't fix everything that night. Didn't erase decades of pain. But we started. Really started. And when I left, Rachel hugged me again. This time it lasted longer. And when she pulled away, she said, "Come back next month. We'll do this again." "I will," I promised. Marcus still hadn't responded, but I kept writing, kept hoping. And then, one day, almost a year after I sent the first letter, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello, Dad?" Marcus's voice, uncertain, guarded. "Marcus," I said, my heart pounding. "I'm here." Silence. Then, "I got your letters." I waited, didn't push. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said, "but I wanted you to know. I read them. All of them." "Thank you," I said. That's all I needed to hear. Another silence. Then, "Maybe we can talk sometime. Not now, but sometime." "Whenever you're ready," I said. "I'll be here." He hung up. But it was enough, more than enough. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the phone. My kids were still hurt, still angry, but they were talking to me. And that was something I'd thought I'd lost forever. I thought about the Admiral, about how he'd spent his last months trying to give me a second chance, trying to show me it wasn't too late. And I realized something. He hadn't just given me money, he'd given me time. Time to rebuild, time to heal, time to become the father I should have been. And I wasn't going to waste it. 2 years after the Admiral's death, I stood in front of the Ashford Foundation building. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, just a converted office space with large windows and a sign out front, but it was ours. A place where veterans and their families could come for help, for hope. Inside, the walls were covered with photos, veterans who'd reconnected with their families, kids who'd found their way back to their parents, success stories, but also reminders, pictures of the Admiral, of me, of everyone who'd walked through these doors looking for a second chance. I walked through the main room. Counseling sessions were happening in private offices. A support group was meeting in the conference room. Laughter came from somewhere down the hall. Real laughter, the kind that happens when people finally let their guard down. Sarah, the foundation director, came up to me. "Morning, Clifford," she said. "We've got 3 new families starting this week." I nodded. "That's good. Really good." She smiled. "You should be proud. You've helped a lot of people." I looked around the room. The Admiral helped people. "I'm just continuing what he started." She squeezed my shoulder. "He'd be proud of you." I hope so. I really did. That afternoon, I had lunch with Brian. We met at the same diner, same booth. It had become our routine. Once a month, every month, for 2 years now. He ordered a burger. I ordered coffee. "How's the foundation?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Growing. We're thinking about opening a second location." He nodded, impressed. "That's great, Dad." I looked at him. We still had a long way to go. Still had conversations we hadn't had. Wounds that hadn't healed completely. But we were trying, and that meant everything. "I wanted to tell you something," I said. "I've been working with a therapist at the foundation, dealing with some things." Brian set down his burger. Yeah, I wanted you to know. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I pushed you all away, and I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning." He studied me for a moment. "That takes guts, Dad, to admit you need help." I shrugged. "The Admiral taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's strength." Brian smiled. A real smile. One I hadn't seen in years. "I'm glad you're doing that." We finished lunch, talked about his job, his girlfriend, normal things. When we said goodbye, he hugged me. A quick hug, but genuine. And when he pulled away, he said, "See you next month." I nodded. "Absolutely." Rachel invited me to her wedding. She and Alex had decided to make it official, small ceremony, just close friends and family. When she called to invite me, I almost dropped the phone. "You want me there?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Of course I do," she said. "You're my dad." Those words, "You're my dad." I'd waited so long to hear them again, to know that I still mattered to her. "I'll be there," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." The wedding was beautiful, simple, held in a garden with string lights and flowers everywhere. I sat in the second row, not the front. I hadn't earned that yet, but I was there, and that was enough. When Rachel walked down the aisle, my throat tightened. She was radiant, happy, and when she passed my row, she looked at me, really looked at me, and she smiled. Not a forced smile, a real one. I smiled back, tears streaming down my face. I didn't care who saw. At the reception, Rachel came up to me, asked me to dance. We stood on the dance floor, swaying awkwardly to a slow song. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me," I said. She pulled back, looked at me. "I'm still hurt, Dad. It's going to take time." "I know," I said, "and I'll wait, as long as you need." She nodded. "I know you will." When the song ended, she hugged me. A real hug. The kind that says I still love you, even if I don't know how to forgive you yet. And that was more than I'd ever hoped for. Marcus surprised me 6 months later. He showed up at the foundation unannounced. I was in my office going over budgets when Sarah knocked on the door. "Someone's here to see you," she said. I looked up. "Who?" "Your son." My heart stopped. I stood up, walked to the lobby, and there he was. Marcus, 38 now. Looked so much like his mother. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Hi, Dad," he said. "Hi, Marcus," I managed to say. We stood there for a moment. Then he gestured to the building. "Can I see what you've been doing?" I gave him a tour, showed him the counseling rooms, the support groups, introduced him to some of the staff. He didn't say much, just listened, observed. When we got back to my office, he sat down across from me. "This is really good, Dad," he said. "What you're doing here?" "I'm trying," I said. "Trying to help people avoid the mistakes I made." He nodded. "I read all your letters, every single one. I didn't know what to say, so I just waited." "I'm still angry," he said. "Still don't understand why you couldn't have been this person when we were kids." "I don't understand it either," I admitted. "I wish I could go back, do it differently, but I can't. All I can do is try to be better now." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I'm not ready to forgive you, but I'm willing to try, to see if we can build something new. That's all I'm asking," I said, my voice breaking. He stood up, extended his hand. I shook it. And then, unexpectedly, he pulled me into a hug, brief, awkward, but real. "Take care of yourself, Dad," he said. "You too, son." He left, but he came back, a month later, then 2 months after that. We started slowly, coffee, phone calls, text messages. It wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, but it was something, and that was more than I'd ever thought I'd have. 3 years after the Admiral's death, I visited his grave. It had become a ritual. Every year on the anniversary, I'd bring flowers, sit on the grass, talk to him like he was still there. I told him about the foundation, about the families we'd helped, about Rachel's wedding, about Marcus showing up, about Brian's monthly lunches. I told him everything. "You gave me a second chance," I said quietly, "and I'm not wasting it. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be." The wind rustled through the trees. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of gratitude for a man who'd been a stranger, who'd become my father, who'd taught me, in just a few short months, what it meant to be human. I placed the flowers on his grave, touched the headstone, And then I said something I'd never said while he was alive. "I love you, Dad. Thank you." I stood up, brushed the grass off my pants, and walked back to my car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. I got in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, thinking, reflecting. I thought about the man I'd been, the soldier who couldn't show emotion, the father who couldn't show love, the man who'd believed that strength meant standing alone. I'd been wrong about everything, but I wasn't that man anymore. The Admiral had seen something in me, something I couldn't see in myself, and he'd given me the tools to become better. Not perfect, but better. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Dinner next week? Bring someone if you want." I smiled. Typed back, "I'll be there." Another text came in. This one from Marcus. "Foundation fundraiser next month. I'd like to help, if you want." I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. "Of course," I typed. That would mean a lot. Brian had sent a message earlier. "Forgot to mention, bringing my girlfriend to lunch next time. Hope that's okay." "More than okay," I'd responded. I put the phone down and looked out at the cemetery, at the rows of headstones, at the lives that had ended, the legacies left behind, and I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Wasn't afraid of dying alone. Wasn't afraid of being forgotten. Because I'd finally done something that mattered. I'd helped people. Really helped them. And I'd started to rebuild the bridges I'd burned. Not all of them. Some were too damaged, but enough to know that I wasn't alone anymore. I drove home as the sun disappeared below the horizon. My apartment was still small, still simple, but it didn't feel empty anymore. There were pictures on the walls now. Pictures of Rachel's wedding, of Brian and his girlfriend, of Marcus at the foundation, and in the center a picture of the Admiral, my father. I made dinner, sat at the table, ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness. It was the quiet of peace, of contentment, of a man who'd finally found his way home. That night, I pulled out the Admiral's letter, read it one more time. His words still hit me the same way they had the first time. Use this money wisely, help people, show your kids who you really are. I'd done that, not perfectly, but I'd tried, and I was still trying. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. Then I placed it in a drawer next to the Navy cross he'd left me, closed the drawer, and walked to the window. The city stretched out before me, lights twinkling in the darkness, people living their lives, fighting their battles, searching for connection. I thought about all the veterans who'd walked through the foundation doors, all the families who'd found their way back to each other. And I thought about the Admiral, about how one act of compassion, one choice to help a stranger, had changed everything. I didn't have all my kids back, didn't have the perfect family reunion, but I had something real, something honest, and that was more than I'd ever thought I deserved. I thought about my father's last words to me. "You matter. You're not alone." He was right. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I turned away from the window and went to bed. And for the first time in 68 years, I slept peacefully. No regrets weighing me down, no guilt suffocating me. Just peace, hard-earned, well-deserved peace. The Admiral had given me a gift, not money, not status, but something far more valuable. He'd given me the chance to become the man I was always meant to be, a father, a friend, a human being, and I'd finally accepted it. I closed my eyes and I could almost hear his voice, steady, calm, proud. "Well done, son. Well done." And I knew, wherever he was smiling, because I'd kept my promise. I'd made his life mean something, and in doing so, I'd finally made mine mean something too.